Well, the Great Awakening was briefer, usually dated around 1740 to 1746. It tended to be in many places more emotional, outbursts, people crying out, falling down, weeping. George Whitefield was asked once, why don't you control your meetings better? Why do you allow so much emotion? It's probably some Dutchman asked that question. Whitefield's response was, no one is surprised at someone weeping at a funeral. Why should you be surprised at people weeping over the death of their own souls? And so there was a great emotional intensity. The leadership of the Great Awakening in the colonies, the British colonies,
he didn't like the English any more than we did, I don't think.
What I wanted to quote to Sinclair, this is all parenthetical, is Jonathan Edwards' great statement that he looked forward to the coming of the millennium when the whole world will be as polite as Englishmen. Certain parts of Great Britain were apparently left out of that kind of vision of civilization. The outer Celtic fringe was sort of eliminated. Anyway, the Great Awakening was shorter, more intense, had perhaps more famous leadership, and at least on our side of the Atlantic was decidedly Calvinistic in its leadership. The Second Awakening was a good bit longer. It was over several decades, less often emotionally intense, and the beginning of a more mixed American kind of revivalism where some of the leaders were Reformed and some of them were Arminian. So that would be some ways of thinking about some of the differences.
And do you find that Ian Murray's distinction, the classic book, Revival and Revivalism, to be a helpful marker between First and Great Awakening, or do we not want to be that negative toward the Second Great Awakening? I don't think Ian Murray is either, but that sort of nomenclature. There were revivals that you couldn't plan for. The Spirit came in the sovereign outpouring and work of awakening, which gave way into the 19th century to a kind of revivalism, most egregiously with Finney's new measures. You could plan for it. There were dedicated steps you could do. You could, even in our time, we're used to announcing a revival this Saturday, if only that it were that easy to just hang the banner and then revival would come. So he distinguishes between that Spirit-wrought, surprising work of God in revival, and then the revivalism, something that we think we can plan for, we can manufacture with just the right steps. And at least in broad strokes, I found it helpful to see the Second Great Awakening moving more in that revivalism direction. Fair?
Yeah, I think what happened in the 19th century, maybe even more here than in the UK, was that it was obvious that God used secondary means in awakening. He employed prayer, preaching of the word, certain patterns. Things were seen to be conducive, that is to say, they were consistent with a biblical pattern of operation, and that was turned round into, if these are the means God has used, then let's use those means and God will do this. And that was really to reverse the divine pattern, I think.
But I do think Ian Murray's book is very helpful.
Yeah, it's very good.
It's very stimulating. Yeah. And part of what turned things around is that Finney was such a good self-promoter. There were less well-known, very fine Calvinist evangelists like Asahel Nettleton.
Yes.
But he didn't promote himself the way Finney promoted himself. So,
it's amazing and hardly pronounce Asahel Nettleton today, whereas everybody knows the name Finney, But Nettleton was a very powerful instrument in the awakening, wasn't he?